Alrighty, YouTube, Niner Empire, what is going down? Welcome back to another video. So obviously Kyle Shanahan was asked about Brock Purdy during the bye week and things of that nature, and he was asked about Brock Purdy and how basically he thinks Brock Purdy will kind of respond after having a couple weeks off with the first round bye. So with Kyle Shanahan, we all know that he emphasizes rust over rest, and pretty much what that means is he's never been a fan of resting too many guys when it comes to like meaningless games like the Week 18 game that we just seen. But he doesn't like resting too many of those players because he feels like they could all come back rusty. And look, it's a thing where I completely understand where he's coming from. I agree with him in that aspect. Like, I do believe that could cause some type of rust. But, like, Kyle Shanahan in the Week 18 game, he rested Brock Purdy, Christian McCaffrey, which Christian McCaffrey was dealing with the mild calf strain. But I guarantee you if the 49ers would have had to go play in the wild card round, that Christian McCaffrey would 100% have played that game. But you don't need to play McCaffrey, so obviously he rests McCaffrey. George Kittle and Dre Greenlaw were said to have Achilles tendonitis and back spasms. Obviously, I still believe, and I said this when that news came out, but I still believe that was kind of bogus. I don't, in no way, shape, or form, believe that they had back spasms and Achilles tendonitis. And even if they may have, they would have still played in that game again if it was the wild card round. So Kyle Shanahan rested those guys. And then you look at like guys like Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk and some of the offensive line. Those guys played in that game for a quarter or two, and then they were eventually pulled. So Kyle Shanahan just, obviously it seems like from what he said and kind of what he did in that game, he wanted to make sure that those guys were still getting in-game action, whether they had, a first... I guess because they knew they had the first round bye week and that they were going to get their time off. So, I mean, Kyle Shanahan has an interesting way. There's some other coaches out there that kind of look at it that way in terms of not resting too many guys and at least playing them for a quarter or two. But for the most part, that's always kind of how Kyle Shanahan's been as a coach, especially if he knows that he's got the first round bye. If I can remember in 2019, the starters, when we had the 1 seed on lock, I believe played in the Week 17 game back then, because obviously there were only 17 weeks, not 18. But yeah, so like, if I can remember right, I believe Kyle even did it back then too with having the 1 seed on lock. So, with Kyle Shanahan, again, he makes a good point when he talks about emphasizing, rust over rest. And those guys got some in-game action, but I think the biggest question is Brock Purdy, because obviously Brock Purdy was the only the only guy that actually truly was rested and wasn't dealing with an injury of some sort. And Kyle Shanahan said, going into the game, that Brock Purdy was going to be the only guy actually being rested by him. Other guys were either dealing with injuries, and he didn't want to, he wanted to take a more cautious approach. But either way, they asked him, of course, about Brock Purdy during the bye week. And Kyle Shanahan basically said, Brock Purdy will not be rusty because the Niners have given him a significant workload during his time off from playing against live opposing defenses. And basically what Kyle said here is he hasn't been on a bye week. We pushed the heck out of Brock, meetings, practice. He's been here. He's worked on his days off. We got 2 bigger practices last week than we do in a normal week, and Brock went out with the guys on Monday and did some things with them. Now we are going to get 2 practices in him again. I don't worry about that stuff affecting Brock at all for Saturday. Now, again, coaches, whose teams have clinched the playoffs, they always have to keep a balance in there with keeping their best players healthy, not wanting them to be rusty. So obviously Shanahan is seemingly confident that he made the right call with Brock Purdy not playing him in that season finale. But again, like, there's a lot of coaches that think that way when, if their team gets that first round bye and they're really playing in a meaningless game. And it's not even just the first round bye, it's more so Those guys are, you know, if it's a meaningless game where, it could be a 5th and a 6th seed that's already locked in place, and, they don't have to, there's no scenario win or lose where it could affect their seeds. And, like, obviously coaches like that are going to do the same thing when it comes to that. Like, they're probably not playing. But see, with the Cowboys and the Commanders, everybody thought the Cowboys in the season finale were going to bench their starters. They ended up playing their starters, which sometimes, I guess looking back on that, I wonder if playing their starters was the right call, considering they had to go in there, next week and play a wild card game in which they lost. So I don't know if they may have been too tired from that game. I mean, the Cowboys never show up in the playoffs, so again, nobody's surprised that they exited in the manner that they did. But it is always interesting to see how teams kind of think when it comes to benching guys, and I guess, going back to Dallas, like, in a way, I don't think it was a meaningless game, because I do believe there were some circumstances during that game that, win or lose for the Cowboys, I think there was some type of scenario where they could have, their seeding could have gotten switched. But the Cowboys simply just took care of business that game, too. I believe they beat them pretty convincingly in that game. I want to say they hung up 40, but, stuff like that always makes you wonder. Yeah, I mean, they beat them 38-10, and then the first time they played them in November, they beat them by 35 points, 45-10. But stuff like that though makes you wonder if the Cowboys playing their starters, in a fairly meaningless game that they probably would have won no matter how they played their starters or not. It kind of makes you wonder if that took a toll on them going into this week. But obviously it doesn't matter, with what happened with the Cowboys. But yeah, so obviously wanted to, Brock Purdy seems like he's good to go, of course. I know he's good to go. It's not even like he seems like he's good to go. I knew Kyle would want to make sure this guy is ready to rock and roll come Saturday. And those guys have, with Brock Purdy not taking any days off, he didn't get a bye week. Pretty much what Kyle was saying. So obviously you just hope the guy comes in here, on Saturday and just kind of does his thing. And there's no doubt in my mind that Brock Purdy will do exactly that. So, yeah, seems like Brock Purdy's ready to go. He's been doing a lot of work. He's not going to be rusty, says Kyle Shanahan. Good to hear, obviously, from the head coach and the guy that probably spends the most time with Brock Purdy, because it seems like they're getting him prepared and that there's kind of nothing to worry about there.